So, Sam, where were you in 1996? I was 6.
I think I was probably watching Spider-Man.
Well,
Like
the rest of the world was watching Trainspotting, that zeitgeisty movie, and this is the sequel. It has reteamed the same cast and crew? No, not the car.
the crew is probably the same as well.
Yeah, well, the main talents are the same. So it's directed by Danny Boyle and it's written by John Hodge, and it's more a sequel to the movie than an adaptation of the sequel to Trainspotting in book form, which was called Porno, though it steals some elements from that Irvine Welsh book. So at the end of the first film, Renton, Sick Boy, Spud, and Begbie, the gang, did this drug deal for £16,000, which was a lot of money 20 years ago. But Renton stole the money, though he left Spud's share because he liked Spud the best out of all of them. And the film catches up 20 years on, and Sick Boy's running a failing pub. Spud has failed to kick the habit and is unemployed and estranged from his wife and son, and Begbie is in prison. But Renton, following plot reasons, comes back to Edinburgh, and the gang in various forms are reunited. And here is a clip of Renton chatting to Spud after he's forced Spud to go for a run.
Instant tomorrows, handcrafted sorrows, all-star bravery, imaginary jargon, encrypted by business.
Thanks, bro. Can't fail again, Mark. You know, I need to detox the system.
Oh, Spud, detox the system. What does that even mean? Doesn't mean anything. It's not getting it out of your body that's the problem, it's getting it out of your mind. You are an addict.
I think I haven't heard that 100,000 times, Mark. You got 12 more steps for my comedy.
So, be addicted. Be addicted to something else.
Like you're running until I feel sick.
Yes! Or something else. You've got to channel it. You've got to control it. People try all sorts. Some people do boxing.
Boxing?
Well, it's just an example. I don't mean you should...
So what did you channel into?
Getting away.
So I was a little underwhelmed by it. I think it's not terrible and it has some strong moments, but overall it's a bit sprawling and unfocused, and I'm not sure it really justifies its existence, which it kind of needed to do, and I don't think it did. And we've discussed many times in the podcast, and very recently with La La Land, this modern trend of nostalgia and movies which just reference other things as a way to trick you into caring. And I mean, this is sort of part of like modern life in general. This sort of nostalgia thing is very millennial thing. So Trainspotting 2, if it's going to ape Trainspotting 1, which encapsulated the 90s so brilliantly, has to sort of include nostalgia for nostalgia. I don't know if put it like nostalgia binging.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what like The World's End was about, almost, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it kind of has to include that if it's going to encapsulate modern life. And this is a film about nostalgia and people in their 40s looking back to their 20s and regretting things and wishing they've done things differently. So it has more of a license to do that. And in some ways it earns it. However, it also directly references the film in sort of very obvious visual ways, which is just very distracting. And for example, there's a bit that's been heavily featured in the trailer for Trainspotting 2 where Ewan McGregor is almost run over by a car and puts his hand on the bonnet and smiles, as he does in the first movie. And it serves no other dramatic purpose than to just remind you of the first film in a way which is a bit fourth wall breaking.
Yeah.
And there's
annoying.
also
Wouldn't like it.
a version of the Choose Life speech, and Kelly MacDonald is sort of shoehorned in for 5 minutes in a way which feels like just things on a checklist being ticked off. And it has the added effect of sort of canonizing everything in the original, and it feels like the characters aren't remembering their past, but remembering Trainspotting the movie at times, if you know what I mean, in a way which is a little irritating. And structurally, it's also quite problematic. Unlike the first one, which ate the sort of Goodfellas collection of vignettes, which really seamlessly tied together. This one, because it's about Renton returning, it doesn't have his voiceover or perspective, so it feels a bit just stitched together. And it has good bits, but they're not really cohesively tied to a main narrative thrust. And Spud's story has the most potential to be dramatically interesting because he's the one who hasn't kicked the habit, and it's like after the exuberance of the 90s, what's it like being a heroin addict for 20 years? Obviously, kind of sucks, but his plotline is really sidelined, and there isn't really enough story going on for like the 2-hour run length, and so it compensates with a lot of plots, and the plot that it does have is quite ropey, kind of like genre movie stuff, and it's in danger of becoming like a sort of Guy Ritchie colourful caper movie with, you know, just characters, and it's just a bit underwhelming. But there are some things I enjoyed about it. The cast are all excellent, and there is something inherently cool about them reprising their roles, and that has a certain, I don't know, something you can't really fake about, you know, Johnny Lee Miller and Ewan McGregor having a scene together 20 years on.
Yeah.
There's just something cool about it. And I think they all do really good work. I think Robert Carlyle is the standout because Begbie is the most interesting character because he's such a force of nature. I mean, he is like Joe Pesci in Goodfellas, but it's like, what is that character like 20 years on? Like, if you know, you expect those characters will die.
Yeah.
But and he has a lot of pathos to his character and like a lot of nuance, which isn't necessarily completely in the script. It just sort of, his performances kind of carries it. And in the final act, it goes kind of full caper movie, but he gives it a lot of credibility, which is good. I think directing wise, Danny Boyle is on a constant quest to make everything as exciting as possible all the time.
Yeah.
Which is like his thing. So there's a lot of visual pyrotechnics going on, some of which is good, some of which is there just because anything at all boring is an affront to him as a person. So I must use every camera trick I have at my disposal. But there's a little style of a substance. And I would just say it's not really enough going on. It's like kind of it's all about nostalgia and regretting the past, but it doesn't really investigate that at all. And the first movie, which is like cribbed a lot from the book, really encapsulates sort of post-industrial and like Thatcherism and Britpop coming at the same time. And maybe it's because the book was set in the late 80s and released in the early 90s. So it had a bit of sort of years of perspective to kind of like get a handle on it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And now 20 years on, as we were just mentioning, the world is like nuts and nothing.
It's very
really,
turbulent.
It's very turbulent.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really encapsulate modern Scotland. There's nothing about Scottish independence. There's a plot point about like them getting an EU grant, which is hilariously dated. They must have shot that scene and like, oh shit, like, you know, Brexit ruined it. So a bit disappointing, really. Not like an embarrassment. Doesn't like ruin the original, but just feels a bit unnecessary.
Fair enough.
Sam and Danny both watched a film and they decided to record a few opinions on the things they saw. You're gonna hear them in a moment or so. There could be angry disagreements, but their views are normally quite close. A joint review shared between two podcast brothers.